By the beginning of 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte was officially considered a political corpse. Europe checked the box. Case closed. He had been stripped of his army, his continent, and his status, replaced with a tidy exile, formal guarantees, and the hope that this would be enough. History, as usual, smirked. Not long before, this man had governed space stretching from the Atlantic to the edges of Eastern Europe, not rhetorically, but through roads, garrisons, tax systems, and personal discipline. Now his state fit neatly onto an island that, at high tide, could pass for a geographical joke. From the perspective of the great powers, it was a perfect solution. Alive, but switched off. No platform, no levers, no audience. The problem was that they had switched off the wrong thing. Napoleon had never been just a military commander. His strength lay not in the size of his armies, but in his ability to read the political weather faster than anyone else. His exile coincided with the moment Europe was left alone with itself, and immediately began to crack. Vienna turned into a Vanity Fair. Victors who had sworn brotherhood only yesterday suddenly remembered who owed whom, who deserved what, and why they in particular were entitled to more. The common enemy was gone, and it turned out that a system of collective security without a threat worked like an umbrella without rain, useless and irritating. France, meanwhile, received a restoration without renewal. A man returned to the throne who was perfect for portraits but ill-suited to reality. The new regime quickly proved it could lose even in peacetime. An army accustomed to respect and stable pay was handed austerity and lectures. Soldiers began to remember the past not out of nostalgia but out of pragmatism. Under the previous owner, at least, they got paid. This information reached Elba regularly. The letters contained no enthusiasm, only facts, growing irritation, weak legitimacy, no desire to defend the new order. For Napoleon, this was not correspondence. It was diagnosis. The picture was too familiar to ignore. The decision did not look impulsive. It was cold. Europe was demonstrating a classic victor's mistake, the belief that the past would not return simply because it was inconvenient. Supervision of the exile slackened. Attention drifted. Security became a formality. The system relaxed. And at that very moment, he became dangerous again. Late February. Night. Minimum people. Maximum calculation. He leaves the island not like a fugitive, but like someone confident his absence will be noticed too late. 1,000 soldiers. Not an army, but a statement of intent. Enough if you know where you're going and what your opponent's fear rests on. News of his disappearance hits Vienna like a slap. Polite formulas evaporate instantly. Accusations begin. Suspicions. Mutual reproaches. Who failed to watch? Who cut corners? Who trusted the new order too much? The answer doesn't matter. What matters is this. The figure already crossed out is back in the game. When he sets foot on French soil, resistance exists only on paper. Orders are issued, but not carried out. Regiments form up and hesitate. Facing them is not an abstract rebel, but the man they once marched with and won with. To shoot him would mean shooting their own past. Few are willing to do that. Europe thus discovers an unpleasant truth. Removing a man from the map is easier than erasing him from memory. And history, contrary to expectations, is under no obligation to agree with the outcomes of congresses. When Napoleon was once again on French soil, it looked less like the return of an exile than like a system malfunction. Formally, one man with a limited escort. In reality, a stress test for the entire structure of power assembled in his absence. The monarchy responds in a standard way. Paperwork, orders, signatures. The king signs off on a decision to eliminate the problem physically, without dwelling too much on whether the executors are ready for that role. Near Grenoble, the situation slips out of control faster than Paris can react. Regular troops take up position, exactly as regulations require. On both sides stand men in identical uniforms, speaking the same language, sharing the same past. The difference is simple. One side is defending a decree. The other, a memory of a time when things worked. Napoleon Bonaparte behaves neither like a rebel nor like a petitioner. He does not play the game at all. He steps forward and does what the system cannot digest. He removes intermediaries. No generals, no negotiators, just him and the soldiers. The moment hangs, formally. A few seconds, psychologically, an eternity. It turns out that an order to fire and the willingness to fire are not the same thing. What breaks first is not formation, but illusion. Weapons are lowered not out of mutiny, but recognition. One gesture pulls the next with it. The logic of a chain reaction works flawlessly. It is not officers who start shouting, but the rank and file. The words spread instantly because they have been waiting for release. The monarchy loses a regiment not through betrayal, but through absence of authority. From that point, the process is irreversible. Attempts to stop the march resemble a badly organized flash mob. Units move out, meet Napoleon, and disappear as independent forces. They do not fight. They join. In 3 weeks, the king loses more men than some regimes lose in years. The finale is predictable. Flight without drama, without a last word, without bargaining. Paris receives him without resistance, not because everyone is happy, but because there is no one left to resist. The capital reacts like a city tired of uncertainty, loudly, emotionally, without fine analysis of consequences. Power returns not through assault, but through emptiness. Not a single shot fired, and that is perhaps the most humiliating part for his opponents. In Europe, the news provokes not panic, but irritation. The Congress is forced to admit the obvious. The project Napoleon removed has failed, not because of a clever conspiracy, but because of its own overconfidence. The response is swift and unsentimental. No more exiles or compromises. Only numbers, timelines, and mobilization. 4 powers agree on maximum commitment. Each fields the same mass of troops so that no one is tempted to sit it out behind someone else's back. The plan is simple. Drown the problem in numbers and stop experimenting with humaneness. War returns to industrial mode. Armies gather along the frontier that know exactly who they are dealing with. On one side, the British and their allies under a commander accustomed to winning not spectacularly, but reliably. On the other, the Prussians, for whom this conflict has long been a personal account to settle. Their task is not to win immediately, but to hold. Time is now the most expensive resource. In France, Napoleon moves faster than expected. He assembles forces on the march, knowing that delay equals defeat. He has no luxury of defense. If he waits, he will be crushed. The only chance is to break the opponent's logic, to strike first, before the Allies can stitch their plans into a single whole. He chooses risk because the alternatives are worse. 2 armies facing him are stronger, but for now, they are separated, which means he has to drive between them, cut the connection, and solve the problem in pieces. It's a dangerous plan, demanding precise calculation and speed. One mistake, and it ends faster than it began. That is why mid-June becomes the point of no return. He crosses the border without waiting for an invitation. From that moment on, the game runs by his rules again. At least, that is what he's counting on. The first alarm bell for the coalition is not a battle, but tempo. Prussian units moving to meet the French collide with something they have forgotten during years of relative calm. An enemy advancing faster than all staff calculations say is acceptable. Napoleon's maneuvers shatter the familiar rhythm of war. Attempts to slow his advance turn into confusion. The Prussians cannot deploy in time, cannot impose a favorable engagement, and are forced to retreat without fully understanding what exactly went wrong. Urgent messages fly to the British. In the camp of the Duke of Wellington, there are no illusions. If the French Emperor is back on the continent, there will be no spare time. Wellington and Blücher act without prolonged discussion. They know their opponent too well to hope for a pause. War snaps back instantly. No preface, no warm-up. The clock is no longer counting weeks, but hours. The next day, Napoleon Bonaparte does what has always distinguished him from cautious opponents. He deliberately makes his own task harder. He splits his army, knowing it is a risk, but knowing even better that delay is deadlier. He gives half his forces to Marshal Michel Ney, a man he values for personal bravery, even if he sometimes doubts his composure. Ney's task is to take Quatre Bras, the junction through which the British can maneuver. Napoleon himself leads the rest toward Ligny, where the Prussians are waiting. He does not rush without reason. The troops are deployed, positions calibrated. The waiting drags on, and only when a dull rumble of artillery rolls in from the direction of Quatre Bras does Napoleon understand Ney has engaged. That is the signal. Almost simultaneously, French batteries open fire on Prussian positions, and the Battle of Ligny begins. Without warning and without diplomacy, the fight quickly turns the village into a maze of barricades and ruins. Houses change hands, streets become defensive lines, and civilians find themselves trapped between fire and orders no one bothers to explain. War here looks nothing like heroism. It looks cramped, deafening, and merciless. The Prussians hold stubbornly, but the pressure mounts. The French army moves like a mechanism that has had power restored. By evening, it is clear who is setting the terms. Prussian losses reach catastrophic levels. Around 16,000 men are put out of action. The army retreats without collapsing, but it loses the initiative. Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher himself comes within inches of death. His horse is killed. He falls, vanishes from sight. And here it is, worth pausing for an absurd fact that perfectly captures the era. Blücher is 72 years old at this moment. 72. A man of retirement age leading cavalry charges against the most dangerous commander in Europe. History, as always, has little concern for realism. Blücher's officers insist on withdrawal. By every rule, it makes sense, but Blücher refuses. He has given his word to Wellington, and he has no intention of turning that word into an empty formality. Instead of a full retreat, he pulls his army north. Only 18 miles. It is a risky decision, bordering on recklessness. But it preserves the crucial thing, the ability to intervene in the next battle. He prefers to endanger his own army rather than allow his ally to be isolated. On another sector, events unfold less favorably for the French. At Quatre Bras, Marshal Ney loses time. Exactly what Napoleon feared most. Hesitation in decision-making allows the British to dig in. When French units finally attack, they collide with a well-prepared defense. Ney has more men, but numbers do not compensate for the density of fire. Assaults follow one after another, each one costly. By evening, it becomes clear that the moment is gone. The offensive stalls, and British forces under Arthur Wellesley withdraw in good order toward Waterloo. They leave at night, unpursued, preserving formation and combat effectiveness. Ney returns to Napoleon irritated and exhausted, fully aware that he has failed at the crucial task. He did not break the enemy in time. It is in these two parallel episodes, the victory at Ligny and the failure at Quatre Bras, that the outline of the future denouement begins to emerge. Napoleon wins a battle, but he does not win time. And in this campaign, time is a resource that cannot be replenished. So, Marshal Michel Ney does not destroy the British at Quatre Bras, but he achieves the minimum objective. He prevents them from linking up with the Prussians. For Napoleon Bonaparte's plan, that is enough. The opponents are separated, which means they can be struck one by one. The classic approach, tested over decades. Almost immediately, it becomes clear that there is no room for complacency. Part of the Prussian force is still nearby. If Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher manages to reach the British, the entire structure collapses. Napoleon therefore stakes everything on speed. First, crush Arthur Wellesley, then deal with the rest. At that moment, Europe genuinely shrinks to a timer. The decisive point is Sunday, the 18th of June, 1815. Waterloo. Wellington manages to prepare only as much as chaos allows. His army is a mixed assortment. British veterans plus Dutch, Belgian, and German troops assembled at the last moment. Compensating quality with quantity is impossible, so he bets on position. 3 strong points. Hougoumont on the right, La Haye-Sainte in the center, Papelotte on the left, become anchors of defense. In each sit the best troops he has. Blücher reports that he's coming to help, but honestly warns he will not arrive for several hours. Until then, the British will have to survive on their own. If they hold, the game flips. After Ligny, Napoleon considers the Prussians effectively neutralized, but he still hedges his bets and sends part of his forces to finish them off. He prepares the rest against Wellington. On the 17th of June, another member of the coalition intervenes. The weather. A downpour turns the battlefield into a sea of mud. On the morning of the 18th, Napoleon is forced to delay the attack. Artillery cannot function in that mire. He waits. His confidence holds. For now, time still seems to be on his side. Around 11 in the morning, the French army opens the battle with a blow against Hougoumont. The goal is simple. Draw reserves out of the center. It fails. Wellington does not bite. Napoleon then shifts pressure to the center. La Haye-Sainte. Artillery, infantry, massed pressure. The French push the line. British cavalry counterattacks, gets carried away in pursuit, and runs straight into French guns and lancers. The cavalry is effectively annihilated. The Allied center is cracking, but it does not break. Napoleon is already preparing to finish the job when he notices movement on the left. A glance through the spyglass confirms the worst. The Prussians have not only survived, they are advancing toward the battlefield. His plan of dealing with the enemy one at a time begins to unravel. The situation is made worse by Napoleon's physical condition. Severe pain, infection, the need to step away from direct command for a time. He hands control over to Ney, and that is where improvisation begins. Ney sees British infantry pulling back and decides it is a retreat. He throws roughly 9,000 cavalrymen into the attack. Without infantry, without artillery support, Wellington reacts instantly. The infantry forms squares. Cavalry cannot break through the forest of bayonets and begins circling under fire, wave after wave, with the same result. Losses are enormous. The effect is zero. The French do take La Haye-Sainte, bring up artillery, and fire almost point blank. The British line is on the edge. Wellington buys time and looks west, quite literally hoping for sunset. And then Blücher keeps his promise. The Prussians slam into the French flank. Napoleon is forced to redeploy forces. The front stretches. Pressure dissipates. Now he is no longer fighting for victory, but for control of the field. One last card remains. Napoleon commits the Imperial Guard, the elite of the elite, a formation that has never retreated. The Guards advance, reach the crest, and find emptiness. The British are lying flat in the grass. On Wellington's command, the men of Sir Peregrine Maitland rise and fire at point-blank range. Line formation, maximum density of fire. The Guard suffers catastrophic losses and pulls back. Then it runs. That is enough. The sight of the Imperial Guard in flight breaks the entire army. Panic spreads. The Allies launch a general advance. The Prussians press from the east. Napoleon understands the obvious. The day is lost. He orders a retreat. Thus ends Waterloo. By 9 in the evening, a scene unfolds on the battlefield that no one would have dared to predict that morning. Arthur Wellesley and Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher embrace amid smoke, mud, and wreckage. This is not a theatrical gesture, but the instinctive reaction of men who have just survived where survival was never guaranteed. The nightmare that had kept Europe on edge for nearly 20 years is finally stopped. Not by diplomacy, and not by congresses, but by force. Napoleon Bonaparte retreats and returns to Paris with one last hope of pulling off the trick again, raising a new army, forcing negotiations, buying time. But the magic is gone. Waterloo proves to be that rare kind of defeat understood even by supporters. Backing evaporates. Enthusiasm drains away. Political credit drops to zero. His second reign ends almost as soon as it begins. 100 days, and no more. The abdication is arranged quickly and without sentiment. This time there are no illusions left, neither among the victors nor the defeated. He is sent to a place from which there can be no escape under any circumstances, the island of St. Helena. Not as an emperor, not as a symbol, but as a problem no one wants within reach anymore. There, on a remote patch of land off the coast of Africa, he lives out his life under tight supervision, without an army, without politics, Without any ability to interfere with events, Europe finally decides not to take risks. The victory of Wellington and Blucher opens a long pause for the continent, nearly a century without a major pan-European war. During that time, machines displace muscle, factories replace fields, and technology overtakes tradition. The world changes faster than ever before and becomes unrecognizable to the men who fought at Waterloo. Prussia, powered by coal and iron, accelerates especially rapidly. Economic strength turns into military power, and then into political weight. In time, it crystallizes into the German Empire and, by the beginning of the 20th century, once again brings onto the battlefield an army whose scale frightens Europe. History makes a familiar turn. Coalitions return. And the war that began as final will soon give way to a conflict no longer confined to the continent.